Hello and welcome to this Astranti video where we will be looking at how to manage remote and multidisciplinary teams. Now, part of managing and leading teams to success requires being able to manage a host of different types of teams. So in this video, we're going to be focusing on the challenges of managing remote teams. Those are teams where individuals within the team aren't all in the same place at the same time. And we're also going to be looking at the challenges of managing multidisciplinary teams, where you have teams made up of individuals with different skill sets and from perhaps different areas of an organization. And while looking at the challenges, we're going to look at solutions and how you can overcome some of those challenges so that you are leading your teams to success. So let's get started. First of all, then, we'll look at the challenges of managing remote teams. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, you'll know that the major event of 2020 and 2021 has been the COVID-19 pandemic. And specifically, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a major impact on the working world. Those of us who work in office jobs and are used to commuting into the office and working there with other people within the organization suddenly found ourselves working from home. And that came with some benefits. It cut out the commute. It allowed a bit more flexibility. So people working from home could fit their work around their home life a bit more. And obviously for companies, there was the benefit of not having to have so much office space. Staff could work just as well, in many cases, from home. But there are obviously downsides to this as well. And one of the major downsides with regards to teams is that it became more difficult to manage teams remotely. And the major reason for that was there was a lack of face-to-face communication. Now, that can be overcome in a number of ways, as we will see. But the major problem is that it's harder to build relationships with one another and the members of the team when you don't have that face-to-face communication. So what we're going to look at here are, first of all, the challenges and ways to overcome challenges of managing remote teams. So we'll start with a definition just to be clear on what we mean by a remote team. So a remote team is a group of people who work in different locations and communicate via the internet and other technologies. So the team can be dispersed over geographical places and in different places at different times, but that team are working together as a single unit. So that could include a team like in the COVID-19 pandemic that is entirely remote with everyone working from home, but it doesn't need to necessarily apply to situations like that. It could be that an organization has offices around the country or around the world, and you have a team that is working from those different locations. They're all still in the office, but they're all remote from one another. Now, one of the major challenges for remote teams is communication. And that's one of the most common and pressing challenges for managers of these teams. And one of the major reasons of that is, as I've mentioned, a lack of face-to-face communication. So one of the things that is beneficial about face-to-face communication, and what I mean by that is when you're actually in the same room with someone and you can read their facial expressions and their body language. And by reading those things, you can get a sense for whether someone is upset or frustrated, or in fact, whether they are content and happy with what it is that they're doing. There's a lot more that you pick up on than you can do online over Skype, for example. And this may be something you yourself experienced during the pandemic. If you were working from home, you noticed that all those little cues from facial expressions and body language, little subtle things that suddenly aren't there anymore. And it's surprising how much of a difference that can actually make. So how can you as a manager overcome this issue, this lack of face-to-face communication? Well, there are some things you can do. One major thing, which perhaps you have experienced as well, is video calls. With video calls, although it's not quite the same as being in the same room with the person, you can at least see their facial expressions and you can pick up on slightly more than you would if perhaps it was just a phone call. Okay, so if you are managing a remote team, video calls can be a good way to overcome this. A problem that sometimes happens is that individuals in a team may not want to put their camera on, and therefore if you're not seeing them, it doesn't actually provide the solution that it's supposed to. So you could request that as a standard, video webcams should always be turned on for certain meetings. Perhaps if it's just a quick meeting, then it's not as important, but for scheduled meetings or more important meetings, you want everyone in the team to have their cameras on so you can all see each other and you're trying to recreate that in-person, face-to-face environment. Another thing you can do in addition to video calls is simply getting to know your team. Okay, and that could mean just having little one-to-one calls and conversations with them, getting to know them better, and that should help you to build a relationship with them so you can tell if perhaps they are struggling with something, or you can read their tone of voice slightly better than you could if you didn't know them. Building better relationships, it may also encourage greater transparency, and it encourages honesty, and it avoids the need to read between the lines. People may be more willing to just be honest with you if they feel they can trust you because you've made that effort to get to know them. Okay. Another communication issue with remote teams is that you could have teams that are spread out over different time zones. So what do you do if you need to have a meeting with your team, but perhaps there are people all over the world in different time zones? There may be 2 time zones, which is difficult enough to manage it sometimes, but it may be that you have 3 different time zones to deal with, and that can be quite tricky. So here are some ideas to help you overcome that particular challenge. So one thing is to set meeting times in advance, and spontaneous communication is going to be required at times. You want to have that spontaneous communication that you would have in a normal office environment, but sometimes, it's particularly where you've got people over different time zones, you're going to have to set those meetings in advance, particularly if it's an important meeting that everyone needs to be at. So for example, you could set a daily 9 a.m. meeting or whatever time it needs to be to suit the different time zones, but it's one meeting a day that everyone knows what time it is that they have to be there for that. Another thing to do then, if particularly when you've got big gaps between time zones, is to rotate the meeting times to share the burden equally. Okay, it might be that if you're in the UK, a 9 a.m. meeting time is fine because that's the start of the day, but someone in perhaps India who are 7-8 hours ahead, that's going to be not so convenient for them. Or if they're in America, it's going to be far too early in the morning for them. So you need to rotate the meeting times to make sure that it's not just the same people in the team that are having to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to go to a meeting every time. You need to spread that out across the team. Another thing you can do if there isn't much participation required for the meeting is simply to record the call. You're going to want the majority of the team there in the call. But if you record it, then people who cannot make it for time zone reasons can always watch it at a more convenient time for them, and they can get the most out of that meeting without having to actually be there in person. Now, you need to be careful with that. Obviously, you don't want to be having meetings where you are the only person as the manager in the meeting and everyone just watches it later. And you also need to make sure that the team members do actually watch it. So you may need a process or a system to ensure that that particular call has been watched by the people who need to see it. Okay, so in the real world, it's likely that with a new team or a team where communication hasn't been prioritized, there are going to be issues with communicating effectively. And so you may find yourself in a position where, if that has happened, you need to try to overcome the culture or change the culture to improve any poor communication. And there are a number of ways you can do that. So first of all, you want to try and streamline communications, and that means only using a few communication platforms. So whatever it is that your organization uses, maybe limit that down to 2 or 3 main ways of communication. You probably want one for text, instant messaging communication, perhaps one for video calls, and then perhaps one other for maybe team meetings or whatever it might be. It may be that you can cover it in just 2 or maybe even 1, but try and limit it so that it doesn't get overwhelming and people are having to go to all sorts of different places on the computer to find where the meeting is supposed to be and all that kind of thing. It's also going to be really important to set communication guidelines. So you want to establish which platforms should be used for which type of message. So it may be that if it's a small thing or a minor thing, then that's okay to be done via instant messaging. Perhaps if it's a slightly more in-depth conversation that needs to be had, they need to be made by video chat. And perhaps if it's kind of a more formal thing, then, or perhaps if it's anything external to the company, then maybe that needs to be done by email. So whatever the rules are that work for the team, but it's important to set those guidelines and communicate those with the team so everyone knows what platform they should use for which type of scenario. It's really important, as always, with all things, that as the leader of a team, you lead by example. So you need to take the time to actually be an effective communicator yourself. And that might be starting video calls with individuals on your team, particularly if in a situation where poor communication already exists, people are reluctant to start video call. You should start by making it a more normal thing by having regular video chats with people in your team. Maybe just 5 minutes here or there. It normalizes it and makes it part of the culture. So you will have to, in these cases, lead by example. Another way to make sure that your team actually take this up and to improve their communication is to make it a major part of appraisals. So when you have appraisals with your team members, either every 6 months or 12 months, however often it is, make sure you take time to talk about the importance of communication in this remote team, and you need to reward good communication, and you make it an area of improvement for anyone who isn't particularly good at communication. So there we go. There's 4 ways that should be really effective for turning around a team that has poor communication. Another potential issue related to communication in remote teams is language barriers. Okay, so this is going to be the case when you've got teams not just in different time zones, but in different countries, and perhaps members of the team are speaking in a second language compared to whatever their native language is. So if you've got a team that is based around the world, you need to make sure that the whole team understands what is expected of them. You want to discourage the use of slang. So say you've got, maybe it's a UK based company, but you've got a remote team and you've got members from the UK, but perhaps some members from France and maybe India and South America or whatever. You've got people all over the place. And English is going to be the primary language of communication. But if you're using slang, it may be difficult for those who are speaking English as a second language to understand everything that is said. So you need to make it clear that you shouldn't be using slang, especially when communicating with these other members from around the world. You also need to not assume that you've been understood. So you need to sort of take extra steps to make sure that, particularly dealing with language barriers, that you encourage your team to ask questions and to make sure that they understand what it is that is required of them, preventing any possible errors down the line, making sure up front that communication is crystal clear. Finally, you could ask your team what communication method they actually prefer. Perhaps a team member whose first language isn't English would struggle to take instructions in via a video call, but they may prefer instructions via an email. It might be a lot easier for them to read the language than it is to listen to the language. So it's just a case of asking the members of your team what medium of communication they prefer and try to tailor communication towards their needs, insofar that that is an effective thing to do. You don't want to have video calls and then separate emails and all that kind of thing to cater for the different needs of the team. You want to try and get the right balance, but you also want to, make sure you're catering for people who speak a second language. Another challenge when managing remote teams is building relationships, and it can be difficult to form meaningful working relationships when members of the team are remote and perhaps they've never actually met each other in person. So a key part of that is building trust, and in fact, the inability or the difficulty in building trust between members. And as we said, the lack of in-person contact can make it difficult to build trust, and that's particularly true if a team has never actually worked together in person before working remotely. So if you have an entirely remote team that started as remote and these people have never met each other, it's going to be a bigger issue, and it's something that you need to focus on more, is building that trust. If you can have a team work together first, in person first, before becoming remote, then this will be less of an issue. But here are some things you can do to help to build trust in a remote team that perhaps never actually met one another before in person. So you need to try and create some space for informal chat. So the opportunity for people in the team to talk about things that are not specifically related to work. So you could use a group chat on a messaging service where the idea is that on that chat, it is purely social discussions and things outside of work to give people a chance to talk to each other, talk about their interests, and build those relationships between one another. You could have a social page on the sort of internal company network or whatever that is entirely dedicated to that. Okay, so that's a way for people to build trust because they talk about things that are not related to work. You as a manager need to express an interest in the lives and the feelings of the members of your team. So simple questions like, what did you do over the weekend? And perhaps you start with that, and over a couple of weeks, you get to know the people a bit better, and you can ask them more specific questions about their interests and hobbies that you've learned by taking that interest in them. Taking an interest shows that you are taking that step to build a relationship, and that will build trust between you and the members of your team. You also want to try as much as is possible and appropriate to get members of your team to do this with one another. A key thing here is going to be using video calls. Use them not necessarily all the time, but they're going to be easier for building trust, particularly if you can see the person. So if you have a Skype or whatever medium it is that you use, where all the team are together and they can see each other, and perhaps you can use that in conjunction with an informal space. So perhaps once a week, once a month, once a fortnight, you have a group chat where you all get together and you all have your cameras on and you just discuss things that aren't necessarily related to work. And it only needs to be a short chat. But again, it builds trust by talking about things outside of work, and it shows that you're interested in them as people. And if possible, then it's great to meet up in person. In-person interaction is really, really valuable. It enables them to build their relationships. So perhaps, for example, you would have a Christmas meal once a year, or perhaps you would have, quarterly meals that the company arranges, and, people from all over the country or the world, potentially, if it can be arranged, if it's possible, can actually meet in person and actually, make that physical connection. Another aspect of building relationships is going to be holding virtual team building activities. So as with any team, you want to have team building activities. If you can't all be in the same place at the same time, there are ways of doing that virtually, and they can be quite effective if done well. So when traditional team building activities, i.e. physical in-person team building activities, are not possible, have a go at doing them virtually. The key is to keep things simple. So you can use tailored activities. There are lots of online games and activities that are specifically designed for remote teams, so you could use some of those. And you want to keep it simple because you don't want to waste too much time explaining the rules, and you want to avoid any confusion or complication or people not feeling like they want to do it because it's too complicated or not fully engaged. So it can be as simple as a quiz you hold once a week or once a fortnight for your team. And in that quiz, it's fairly standard, and maybe you rotate the quiz master who writes the questions each week and gives everyone a chance to write it. And a simple activity like that can be very effective in building trust within the team. Okay, you want to try and make it a regular activity. So like I say with the quiz, it could be once a fortnight or once a month or whatever it is. Because there isn't that chance for a bit of office chit chat between members of the team, you need to try and recreate that environment. And you could do that with regular activities, and people know that, it's on their calendar. They've got something to look forward to every so often where they can have a bit of a chat with other people in the team about things that aren't specifically related to work. And the key to remember here is that it should be a team building activity. So whatever activity it is that you choose to do, let's say it is a quiz, and you try doing a quiz with your team and you find that people are chatting and having a laugh, but they're not really paying too much attention to the quiz, then that's fine because you've got the team talking to each other and chatting, and their team building is happening regardless of the particular activity. In these situations, you just need to be careful that discussions aren't dominated by strong individuals, that you give everyone who wants to talk a chance to talk. And that's why having slightly more structure, like in a quiz, it gives opportunities for everyone to contribute if they want to. Okay. Now, when you're managing remote teams, a major concern for you as the leader or the manager is going to be the productivity and the performance of the team. You may be wondering whether your team members are actually working on what they're supposed to be working on at all. It's very difficult to say because they're remote and you can't see them. You're not in the same room as them. You're maybe communicating with them primarily through text and the occasional video call, you do have no guarantee that at 9 o'clock in the morning they are at their desk doing the work they need to do. Okay, so here are some ideas and considerations for making sure that your remote team is actually productive and does perform. So obviously with remote teams, you're not in a physical place. You can't just wander around the office and check that people are at their desks and doing what they need to do. That's not an option anymore. So how do you overcome this? How do you ensure that your team remains productive at the same time as not being able to be in the same place as them? Well, it's actually not as difficult as you may think. Being in the same place as someone can help, but there's plenty of things you can do to maintain a productive team remotely. So first of all, the most important thing is to clearly state expectations of the team, and you want to set your SMART targets. And that's going to help you to measure performance remotely. So everyone in the team knows exactly what's expected of them. They've got perhaps deadlines, and you can check in with them at various checkpoints to make sure that they're on track for hitting their targets and deadlines. So that removes some of the uncertainty about when they're actually working. Are they at their desk? Well, you don't have to worry about that so much because you've agreed targets with them. They know what they have to do. So you don't have to sort of micromanage them quite so much. It's going to be important to try and set standard working hours as much as possible. And you want to get everyone to stick to them. So you might say, between the hours of 9 and 5, we expect you to be working for the reason that we may need to contact you. We may need to have meetings. We need to have ongoing communication. But on the other side of that, you want to kind of make people stick to that and say, we don't really want you working before a certain time, and we don't want you working all the way in the evening. You want to prevent burnout, particularly if it's working from home. Employees can often overdo it, and they'll start very early and they'll keep working, and they start to lose that distinction between work and home. And it's really important to try and prevent that happening by setting those standard working hours, have expectations for when they should be at their desk, and once they've done their work for the day, then they don't have to be at their desk anymore. You want to prevent burnout. You're going to want individual targets. So for individuals in your team, you want to set targets for them. And that is to make sure that they are doing the work that they need to do. So if you have targets for them, perhaps weekly or fortnightly or whatever, you can check in with them every now and then and track their progress against their targets. And that will give you an idea of how close they are or how far away they are. And if they're struggling with their targets, if they're a little bit behind, then you can, talk about that, figure out why that is the case, and offer some support and try to get them to catch up. So again, rather than having to be in the same place as someone, you can put things in place. You can set your targets for the team and for individuals, and you're tracking their progress every now and then. That's just as good a way to make sure that they're being productive and performing than simply being in the same room as them. It's also really important to listen to your team in individual meetings or in team meetings. They may be dropping hints. They may be concerned that they're working too much, or they may be concerned that other members of the team are working too much, or perhaps they're not working enough. So just make sure you listen, because everyone's going to have a different experience of working remotely. And so you want to make sure that they are heard, and that any information that they give you, you can think about and implement to make sure that people aren't, burning out or aren't struggling because they are struggling to manage their time, their work time and their home time and things like that. And when it comes to accountability, and this applies not necessarily just to remote teams, this applies to any kind of individual in a team. Individuals will feel more responsible for hitting a target if they can have a say in their own targets. Okay, so giving people accountability, giving people a level of control and some decision making over what it is they do and when they're going to do it, will get that buy-in. That makes them accountable, and that makes them usually more motivated and more likely to hit their targets. So you can still give people accountability by setting individual targets, setting team targets, being clear about that, checking in with individuals and making sure that they are on track to hit those targets. And you don't need to be in the same room as any of these people in the team in order to achieve that. Okay, another part of productivity and performance with relation to remote teams is motivation. Okay, now Generally, when it comes to motivation, it's not all that different from motivating teams who you're in the same room with, non-remote teams. But there are a few differences. So we're going to look at that now. So generally, we can use the same motivation methods as in any team. You may remember this model, the drivers of engagement. We know that motivated individuals tend to be more productive individuals. And so the drivers of engagement, and this will work for remote teams as much as it will for any other team, make sure that employees are involved in decision making. That gives them some level of control and buy-in. You want to make sure you remember to focus on job development and give individuals opportunities to develop in their role. Managers and leaders need to show that you value your employees, either through feedback or showing an interest in them as a person, showing an interest in their career development. Employees need to feel able to voice their opinion, so you need to create a culture where employees feel like they can contribute without feeling embarrassed or scrutinized. And in addition to that, you need to make sure that any good suggestions from your employees are actually acted upon, so that they can see that when they contribute, you actually are interested in their contributions and will do something about it if it's a good idea. The employer needs to show concern about employee well-being, so just checking in, making sure that they're okay. And again, in relation to career development and job development, just making sure that you are giving enough time for those things to show that you are interested in developing this person and making sure that they are happy about their job prospects and progression. And obviously, managers need to actually listen to employees, so either through one-on-one meetings, informal discussions, informal chats, but also in appraisals and more formal settings. You need to show that you're actually listening to employees. All of these things are drivers of engagement, and the better you do all of these things, the more engaged your team members are going to be, the more motivated they'll be, and ideally the more effective they'll be and the more productive they'll be as team members and thus as a team. Okay, so these will stay the same, but there will be a few things that need slightly more focus with remote teams. And this is because interpersonal communication is going to be more difficult, as we've already discussed. So in order to keep teams motivated in remote teams, here are some ideas for that. So as we've already said, you want to make sure that you plan your online meetings, try and keep them regular, keep them scheduled so people know when they're going to be and they make time to come to them. And in those meetings, you make sure that for any work that is done well, you thank the people and you celebrate the success and you celebrate the hard work that they're done. It's easy to forget that, but it's an important thing to do, to make sure that you are celebrating people's and thanking people for their hard work. You want to try and put some time aside as well for ideas and discussions. Even if time is limited, you can just put 5, 10, 15 minutes aside for people to come up with ideas and discuss problems perhaps that the team is having. And let's face it, in reality, not all meetings can be planned. Sometimes they are slightly more spontaneous. And when that is the case, as a manager, you need to make sure that everyone who needs to be in that meeting is in that meeting. As the discussion goes on and decisions need to be made, if the discussion moves into a particular area and a key person from that area isn't involved in the meeting, you need to make sure that they are there so that they feel involved in those decisions being made that are relevant to them. And it's really important that you don't forget about career progression. That was one of the key parts of engagement and driving engagement. Individuals need to feel that they can progress in their career and that you as a manager actually care about their career progression. So you need to make sure that you agree and that you stick to dates for reviews and appraisals. It's really important. It's perhaps more important to make sure that you have those appraisals in remote teams. Okay, have them however often, quarterly, biannually, whenever, but make sure you do still have them. And you want to regularly review team members' development. So see how they are progressing within the team. How are they finding the remote the remote teams? What are the things they're struggling with? What do they do well? Just show that interest, show that you are concerned about that and you want to help them to progress. Doesn't matter whether they're in a remote team or in a team that are fixed to a particular location. Good managers will always do that. Okay, so those are some of the challenges of managing remote teams and several ideas, considerations, and solutions for overcoming those challenges. The main issues are going to be communication, building relationships, and also staying on top of and ensuring that your team are productive and are still performing. Now, how might the challenges of managing remote teams present themselves in finance teams? So let's consider that now. Now, with advancements in technology, it is possible for almost any team to work remotely, and that includes teams in finance. So let's take a look at two types of finance team and see what specific challenges may arise when they work remotely. First of all, we'll look at a finance team within a company's finance department. Now, it can be quite common for these types of finance teams to work remotely, particularly in large multinational companies. Many companies offshore parts of their finance function or distribute finance staff across different divisions or locations, and this means there's quite a good chance that you'll be part of or perhaps even manage a team in which some members work remotely. And in this situation, all of what we've discussed about managing a remote team will become important for you. So let's consider some specific challenges you may face, and one of those is going to be communication. So for example, a team of management accountants, their role is largely about creating and distributing information, either to one another in the team or to support decision makers in other departments and higher up within the organization. And as described earlier, communication is one area that can be difficult when teams are working remotely. And the manager's role will therefore involve ensuring all of the team members are confident in using the organization's communication platforms. And importantly, that the staff and the people in the team know how to use those platforms effectively. And that might involve getting proactively involved and getting feedback from the recipients of the information to make sure that that information is being received on a timely basis and in an acceptable format. And in terms of the latter point, the platform that you choose is going to be quite important. For example, attaching a report to an email may not be as effective as running through that report in a phone call or a video call. Another challenge you may face managing these types of teams is motivation, particularly if you're a manager of a team that carries out repetitive tasks such as transaction processing teams. Managers of these teams may find it difficult to maintain motivation and productivity within these teams when they are remote and working at a distance. And obviously it's easier to get distracted when team members are working from home, especially if your job isn't always grabbing your interest. So in this situation, managers need to regularly check in with their team. They need to check on their progress towards targets, perhaps in a regular morning meeting, and also to maintain good rapport with individual members of the team to ensure that any issues that are impacting work are being addressed. Another issue will be accessing information. Obviously, in order to perform their role, finance teams will inevitably need to access a range of systems where the required data is held. For example, accounting software, presentation tools, or databases within other departments or stock systems, etc., etc. So if staff working remotely cannot access the information that they need digitally, the work will not get done. Therefore, it often falls to the manager of these teams to liaise with the IT department on the team's behalf to overcome or to speed up the resolution of any of the issues that are being faced. And the manager also needs to ensure that all systems are being accessed securely. For example, that a team member accessing sensitive information isn't doing it in, say, a busy coffee shop in full sight of other people on a public Wi-Fi network. Okay, so need to make sure that the security is there. Another specific challenge will be privacy issues, and this kind of follows on from that last point, but some finance teams need to access confidential client information or company information, and if a team member is working from home, that information needs to be kept secure on that team member's computer, and the manager's role here will be to ensure that all the policies and procedures regarding data confidentiality are understood and being maintained. Okay, so those are some of the specific challenges of managing a finance department in an organization. Let's consider how things may be slightly different or similar for an accountancy firm. So it could be seen as a bit more challenging for teams within accountancy firms, more challenging for them to work remotely when compared to finance teams working in a finance department. The biggest challenges for remote working in accountancy firms are going to be secure access to client systems and the need to review physical documents or to verify stock. Now, improvements in technology and digitization for many companies' accounting processes has made remote working more viable for these types of teams. To give you an example, some audit teams now use technologies such as cloud storage and secure data sharing platforms that utilize encryption methods to carry out their audits and to gain access to client systems remotely, whilst ensuring that the data is kept secure. And for that to work effectively, the manager needs to ensure that all team members understand and abide by the terms of and the protocols for access set out by the client for accessing their systems and storing data. For example, that the team have all the relevant login details and know which systems contain the data that they need. Video conference calls can be used by the team to ask clients any questions that may arise. One particular issue of concern for audit teams will be the difficulty of accessing inventory remotely, particularly for inventory counts. And that was a particular concern in the COVID-19 pandemic when access to premises was often prohibited. So in the case of inventory counts, video technology could be used to monitor the count process, but it's often best to carry out those counts in person. So that aspect of the audit may be impractical to carry out remotely. And there's also the issue of building rapport with the client. So a certain amount of face-to-face contact may remain preferable, particularly when you're dealing with clients and obviously with inventory counts. Okay, so those are some of the challenges as they would apply in particular types of finance team. What we're going to do now is take a look at a finance exercise. And in this exercise, we'll go through a scenario, go through some possible solutions, and what you could do is pause the video after you've had a look at the scenario, try and come up with a solution of your own before returning to the video where we'll go through the solution together. So, Joanne has managed her payroll team remotely for the past year. She has noted 4 challenges that she has faced and the methods she has used to overcome them. So, match the challenge faced to the most suitable solution. So here we have 4 different challenges or issues and 4 solutions that we use to overcome those issues. What you need to do is try to match those according to what we've looked at so far. So just before you pause the video, let's just quickly run through these and then have a go at matching them. So challenge 1 is that some of the team members on the team that Joanne has managed, it's a remote team, some of those members were suffering from burnout. Challenge 2 is that 3 team members consistently felt that the targets set for them were too ambitious. As a result, their productivity decreased. Challenge 3, some team members expressed that they felt demotivated despite performing well. Challenge 4, Joanne thought that one team member may have been carrying out non-work related activities during work hours. So those are the 4 issues or challenges. Here are the different solutions. Solution 1, Joanne made sure that she regularly and genuinely thanked her team members for their hard work and efforts. Joanne continually communicated standard hours and ensured all team members stuck to them. Solution 3, Joanne communicated her expectations for the team and provided the team with a document outlining the organization's rules for home working. And then solution 4, Joanne allowed her team members to have a say in the targets that were set. So what you need to do is match the solution to the challenge. Which of those solutions is appropriate to overcome the challenge? And once you've done that, come back and we'll go through the solutions. Okay, so let's start with challenge 1. And challenge 1, remember, was that some team members were suffering from burnout. So which of the solutions would overcome this particular challenge? Burnout in this context refers to working too much, working extra hours, not having a clear separation between home and work life, What would the solution be for that? Well, for challenge 1, the correct solution would be solution 2, and that would be for Joanne as the team leader to continually communicate standard hours and ensure that team members stick to those standard hours. And sticking to standard hours should stop team members from overworking. Challenge 2, 3 team members consistently felt that targets set for them were too ambitious. So they thought that it was not possible, or it was very difficult to do what they were being asked to do, and their productivity decreased. They were demotivated by these difficult targets. How could Joanne respond to that particular issue? The matching solution here is solution 4. That's for Joanne to allow her team members to have a say in the targets that were set. You can overcome demotivation and improve motivation by allowing team members to have some accountability in the targets that they are setting for themselves. It increases buy-in and it improves motivation. So the trick there is to give or hand over some accountability to those team members. Challenge 3, some team members expressed that they felt demotivated despite performing well. So although they're doing a good job, they still feel demotivated. How would we overcome that particular issue? Well, in this case, the key will be to regularly and genuinely thank the team members for the hard work that they are doing. So in a meeting, perhaps a weekly team meeting, the team members are already productive, but they feel perhaps that they're not being recognized for their work. So Joanne simply has to acknowledge their hard work, to thank them for it, and those team members will then feel like their work was actually appreciated. And then challenge 4, Joanne thought that maybe one team member may have been carrying out non-work related activities during work hours. That matches with solution 3, and that is to communicate expectations so there is no confusion over what is expected of that particular team member. So Joanne would provide the team with a document that outlines the rules for home working, just to remove any confusion. Okay, so that is finance exercise. We've applied some of the ideas that we've looked at in this part of the video. So something for you to consider now and to fill in your workbook related to the topics that we've looked at so far in this video. And as always, there is some further reading linked below the video. So if you want to learn any more about the topics that we've covered in this video, particularly if you want to use any particular models or ideas as a reference, then check out the further reading linked below.